Awakening in the middle of a tough snore and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told the bell was again upon the stroke of 1. He felt that he was restored to consciousness in the nick of time, for the special purpose of holding a conference with the second messenger. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour went by, yet nothing came. All this time he lay upon the bed, watching the soft light illuminating his clock, until at last he began to think that the source and secret of this ghostly light may be in the adjoining room, from whence, on further tracing it, it seemed to shine. This idea taking full possession of his mind, he got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door. It was his own room. There was no doubt about that.
Ebenezer Scrooge!
But it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove, from every part of which bright gleaming berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light. Heaped up on the floor in a form of a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, mince pies, plum puddings, red-hot chestnuts, and cherry-cheeked apples. In an easy state upon this couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch high up to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door.
Come in and know me better, man.
Scrooge entered timidly and hung his head before the spirit. He was not the dogged Scrooge he had been, and though the spirit's eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet them.
I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me.
Scrooge reverently did so. It was clothed in one simple green robe bordered with white fur, and its feet bare upon the floor. On its head wore no other covering than a holly wreath. Its curls were long and free as its genial face, its sparkling eyes, its open hand, its cheery voice, its unconstrained demeanor, and its joyful air.
You have never seen the likes of me before.
Never.
Have you never walked forth with the younger members of my family?
I don't think I have. I'm afraid I have not. Have you had many brothers, Spirit?
More than 1,800.
A tremendous family to provide for. The ghost of Christmas present rose.
Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion and learned a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it.
Touch my robe.
Scrooge did as he was told, and held it fast. Holly, mistletoe, red berries, ivy, turkey, geese all vanished instantly. So did the room, the fire, the ruddy glow, the hour of night, and they stood in the streets on Christmas morning. The house fronts looked black enough, and the windows blacker, contrasting with the smooth white sheet of snow upon the roofs. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate or the town, and yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad that the clearest summer air and brightest summer sun might have endeavored to diffuse in vain. For the people who were shoveling away on the housetops were jovial and full of glee, calling out to one another from the parapets, and now and then exchanging a facetious snowball, laughing heartily if it went right and not less heartily if it went wrong. But soon the steeples called good peoples all to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes and with their gayest faces. For they said it was a shame to quarrel upon Christmas Day, and so it was. God love it, so it was.
Is there a peculiar flavor in which you sprinkle from your torch?
There is. My own.
Would it apply to any kind of dinner on this day?
To any kindly given. To a poor one most.
Why to the poor most?
Because it needs it most. There are some upon this earth of yours who lay claim to know us, and who do their deeds of passion, pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfishness in our name, who are as strangers to us and all our kith and kin, as if they had never lived. Remember that, and charge their doings on themselves, not us.
Scrooge promised that he would, and they went on, invisible as they had been before. And, perhaps, it was the pleasure the good spirit had in showing off this power of his, or else it was his own kind, generous, hearty nature, and his sympathy with all the poor men, that led him straight to Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinkling of his torch. Think of that. Bob had but 15 bob a week himself, and yet the ghost of Christmas present blessed his 4-roomed house. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, dressed out in a twice-turned gown, with her children.
Whatever got your precious father, then? And your brother Tiny Tim? And Martha went as late last Christmas Day by half an hour.
Here's Martha, Mother.
Here's Martha, Mother.
There is such a goose, Martha.
Well, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are.
We'd a deal of work to finish up last night and had to clear away this morning, Mother.
Well, never mind. So long as you're here. Sit down by the fire, my dear, and get warm. Lord bless you.
No, that's Father coming.
Hide, Martha, hide. So Martha hid herself, and in came little Bob, the father, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. Why, where is our Martha?
Not coming.
Not coming? Not coming on Christmas Day?
Merry Christmas, Father.
Martha, my dear.
And how did little Tim behave?
As good as gold and better. Somehow, he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much. He told me, coming home, that he hoped the people saw him in church, because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. Young Peter Cratchit came in with the Christmas goose, and such a bustle ensued that you might have thought a goose was the rarest of all birds. At last the dishes were set on, and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit took to carving the bird. There never was such a goose. And after dinner, Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly, with the pudding, like a speckled cannonball, blazing in ignited brandy, with Christmas holly stuck in the top.
Oh, a wonderful pudding, Mother. Your greatest success since our marriage.
Everybody had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought it was at all small pudding for a large family. And now, without a word of warning from the ghost, they stood upon a bleak and desert moor where monstrous masses of rude stone were cast about, as though it were the burial place of giants, lost in a thick gloom of darkest night.
What place is this? A place where miners live, who labor in the bowels of the earth, but they know me. See!
A light shone from the window of a hut, and swiftly they advanced towards it. Passing through the wall of mud and stone, they found a cheerful company assembled around a glowing fire. An old man and woman, with their children and their children's children, and another generation beyond that, in their holiday attire. Again, the ghost sped on, above the black and heaving sea, on and on, until being far away, as he told Scrooge, from any shore they lighted on a ship. They stood beside the helmsman at the wheel, the lookout in the bow, the officers who had the watch. But every man amongst them hummed a Christmas tune, or had a Christmas thought, or spoke below his breath to his companions of some bygone Christmas day, with homeward hopes belonging to it. And every man on board, waking or sleeping, good or bad, had had a kinder word for one another that day than any other day of the year. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, while thus engaged, to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room, with the spirit standing smiling by his side, and looking at the same nephew with approving affability. He was never to know a man more blessed in a laugh than Fred. It is a fair, even-handed, noble adjustment of things, that while there is infection in disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humor. He said that Christmas was a humbug, as I live. He believed it, too.
More shame for him, Fred.
She was very pretty, with a dimpled face and the sunniest pair of eyes you ever saw. He's a comical old fellow, that's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offences carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him.
I've no patience with him.
Oh, I have. I am sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself, always.
Indeed, I think he loses a very good dinner. Do go on, Fred.
I was only going to say that the consequences of his taking a dislike to us and not making merry with us is, I think, that he loses some pleasant moments, which could do him no harm. I mean to give him the same chance every year, whether he likes it or not, for I pity him. He may rail at Christmas till he dies, but he can't help thinking better of it. I defy him. If he finds me going there in good temper year after year, and saying, "Uncle Scrooge, how are you?" if it only puts him in the vein to leave his poor clerk £50, that's something. After tea, they had some music. Scrooge's niece played well upon the harp, and played among other tunes a simple little air which had been familiar to the child who fetched Scrooge from his boarding school, as he had been reminded by the ghost of Christmas past. When the strain of music sounded, all the things the ghost had shown him came upon his mind. He softened more and more, and thought if he could have listened to it often, years ago, he might have cultivated the kindness of life for his own happiness with his own hands. But they didn't devote the whole evening to music. After a while, they played games, for it is good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas, when its mighty founder was a child himself. They played Blind Man's Bluff, and How, When, Where. The ghost was greatly pleased to find Scrooge in a joyful mood, and looked upon him with such favor that he begged like a boy to be allowed to stay until the guests departed. But this, the spirit said, could not be done.
Oh, here's a new game. 1/2 hour, Spirit. Only one.
It was a game called Yes and No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something and the rest must find out what. The brisk fire of questioning to which he was exposed elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal, a rather disagreeable animal, an animal that growled and talked sometimes, and lived in London, and walked about the streets, and was never killed in a market, and was not a horse or a dog. At every fresh question that was put to him, this nephew burst into a fresh roar of laughter, and was so inexpressibly tickled that he was obliged to get up off the sofa and stamp his feet. At last his niece, falling into a similar state, cried out,
I know what it is, Fred. I know what it is.
"And what is it?"
It's your Uncle Scrooge.
Which it certainly was.
He has given us plenty of merriment, I am sure, and it would be ungrateful not to drink to his health. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, wherever he is. He wouldn't take it from me, but he may have it nevertheless. Uncle Scrooge.
To Uncle Scrooge.
Uncle Scrooge had imperceptibly become so light of heart that he would have pledged the unconscious company in return, and thanked them in an inaudible speech if the ghost had given him time. But the whole scene passed off in the last word from his nephew. Much they saw, and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. While Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older. Scrooge had observed this change, but never spoke of it, until, looking at the spirit as they stood together in an open space, he noticed that its hair was grey.
Our spirit's lives so short. My life upon this globe is very brief. It ends tonight. Tonight? At midnight. Hark! The time is drawing near.
The chimes were ringing the 11:15 at that moment.
Forgive me if I am not justified in what I ask, but I see something strange and not belonging to yourself in your robes.
From the folding of his robes, it brought 2 children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, and miserable. They knelt down at its feet, and clung upon the outside of its garment. Where graceful youth should have filled their features out, a stale and shriveled hand like that of age had pinched and twisted them, and pulled them into shreds. Scrooge started back, appalled.
Are they yours? They are man's, and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both, but most of all beware this boy, For on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased.
Have they no refuge or resource?
Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?
The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. As the last bell tolled, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifted up his eyes, beholding a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him.